The frost cracked under his boots like tiny bones. Each step was a small, sharp protest in the pre-dawn silence of the valley. The air was a blade, sharp and clean, scented with pine and the distant promise of snow. For Tom, the cold was a familiar blanket, one he pulled around himself every morning. It was easier to feel nothing than to feel the other thing. The hollowed-out silence that lived in the house behind him, in the empty side of the bed, in the too-quiet kitchen. 10 years. A decade measured not in birthdays or holidays, but in the slow, granular accumulation of days just like this one. The stable was a cathedral of quiet shadows and dust motes dancing in the single shard of light from the high window. The smell was his oldest memory. Sweet hay, aged leather, the rich earthy scent of horse. It was the only place where the hollow feeling didn't echo quite so loudly. He moved down the row, a big, weathered man whose shoulders seemed to carry a permanent slump, a physical apology for taking up space. His hands, rough and capable, brushed over stall doors, checking latches out of habit. He stopped at the last stall, the one that had been empty for a decade, the one he'd kept clean out of a stubborn, stupid hope that had long since curdled into a form of self-punishment. Now, it was occupied. The agency had called him a project horse, a rescue, a Mustang and Appaloosa mix, they said, found wandering loose and wild in the high country, a ghost of a creature more bone than flesh. They'd said he was unhandable, a lost cause. Tom had said yes before he'd even hung up the phone. He knew about lost causes. He didn't look at the horse directly, not at first. He leaned against the stall door, his forehead pressed to the cool, splintered wood, and just listened. The soft, rhythmic pull of breath, the shift of a hoof on the bedding, the quiet, alive sounds of another being sharing his silence. Finally, he looked. The horse stood in the far corner, a sculpture of tension and shadow. His coat was a map of a hard life, a canvas of dappled gray and white splashed with the distinctive ink-blot spots of his Appaloosa blood. But it was crisscrossed with a finer, darker map of scars, jagged lines across his shoulders, a puckered tear on his flank, a history of violence written in flesh. His ribs still showed, a stark ladder under his skin. But it was his eyes that held Tom captive. They weren't the soft, curious eyes of a domestic animal. They were ancient, dark, and bottomless, holding a wilderness so profound it felt like looking into the heart of the mountain itself. There was no trust there, only a deep, weary calculation. Tom didn't speak. Words felt too loud, too clumsy for this space. He simply unlaced the stall and stepped inside, leaving the door open behind him. An offering, an escape route. The horse's head snapped up, his ears pinned flat back against his skull, a clear, dangerous warning. A puff of sharp, nervous air blew from his nostrils. Tom froze, his own breath catching in his throat. He held his hands out, palms open and empty. A surrender. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, a statue in the dim light, letting the animal take his measure. Minutes stretched, thin and taut. The only movement was the slow, steady cloud of their breath mingling in the cold air. Tom's heart was a dull drum against his ribs. He saw the horse's gaze flick from his face to his hands to the open door, over and over, calculating the threat, the distance, the odds. Slowly, imperceptibly, the tension in the horse's neck eased. The pinned ears twitched forward, then swiveled back, uncertain. The defensive snort became a softer, curious sniff. Tom took one slow, deliberate step forward, then another. The horse didn't move away. He just watched, those deep, dark eyes tracking every tiny motion. Tom stopped, an arm's length away. He could feel the animal's body heat, could see the fine tremor running through his muscles. He kept his eyes lowered, not challenging, just present. He didn't reach out to touch. He just waited. The horse stretched his neck out, his nose quivering. He sniffed the air an inch from Tom's sleeve, the sound loud in the quiet. Tom could smell him then, the wild scent of him. Not just hay and stall, but of cold wind and pine sap and high, lonely places. The velvet muzzle hesitated, then brushed against the worn flannel of Tom's jacket. It was the lightest touch, a ghost of a thing. But Tom felt it like a current straight to his core. It was the first living thing to voluntarily touch him in longer than he could remember. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It shook on the way out. He didn't move, afraid to break the spell. The horse dropped his head. Then, not in submission, but in a kind of exhausted truce. He took a single step closer, and his warm, hay-scented breath fogged over Tom's frozen hands. In that shared breath, in that fragile, wordless space between them, something shifted. It wasn't joy, it wasn't happiness. It was something quieter, rarer. It was the simple, staggering acknowledgement of two broken things recognizing the same fracture in the other. Tom stood there until his feet went numb with cold, until the sun climbed higher and a weak light finally filled the stall. He finally turned to go, his movements slow and heavy. He didn't look back as he stepped out into the aisle, latching the door softly behind him. He walked a few paces toward the house, the hollow feeling inside him suddenly different. Not gone, but changed. He stopped at the sound behind him. A single quiet step. Then another. He turned. The horse was there, at the stall door, his head hanging over it, watching Tom walk away. He wasn't trying to get out. He was just watching. His dark eyes were no longer calculating an escape, but simply following the man's retreat, as if he too had felt the shift in the silence and wasn't quite ready for it to end. The silence in the stable became their new language. Tom stopped bringing a radio. The scratchy old country songs felt like a violation now, an intrusion, on the quiet communion that had settled between him and the horse. He didn't name him. The agency's paperwork had some clinical designation, a number and a letter. But it felt wrong. A name would be a claim, and this creature, with his scars and his bottomless eyes, was not something to be claimed. He was a guest. A temporary, wild-hearted guest in Tom's world of fences and routines. The horse's trust was a slow, cautious river finding a new path. He would take an apple slice from Tom's flat palm, his lips whiskery and careful. He'd stand for grooming, the stiff brush moving over the tapestry of his scars, his skin twitching under the touch, as if remembering a different, harsher contact. But there were lines he wouldn't cross. The halter still hung on a hook, a symbol of domestication he wanted no part of. If Tom moved too quickly, or if a sudden noise from the yard, the slam of a truck door, the crack of a branch, echoed through the stable, the ancient wildness would flood back into his eyes in an instant. He'd spin away, pressing himself, into the corner of his stall, a tremor running through his body like a minor earthquake. He was there, but part of him was always elsewhere, always listening for a different, older song on the wind. It was the words that started it. Tom, a man of few words to begin with, had begun to talk to him. Not in baby talk or commands, but in a low, steady murmur. He'd talk about the weather, the stubborn tractor, the way the light hit the mountains in the evening. It was a monologue, to fill the silence, a one-sided conversation with a creature who offered only the soft sound of his breathing in return. Until one evening, Tom was mending a torn saddle blanket, sitting on an upturned bucket just outside the stall, the horse drowsing in the late afternoon sun slanting through the door. He was talking without thinking, his voice a soft rumble. "And the coffee's gone bitter again. Always does when I let it sit. Ben used to say I could ruin a fresh pot just by looking at it. The name. Ben." It dropped into the quiet space between them, and the effect was instantaneous and electric. The horse's head jerked up. Not the startled jump from a loud noise, but a sharp, precise movement of pure recognition. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His ears, usually relaxed or lazily swiveling, locked forward, tense as arrows. His nostrils flared, not taking in a general scent, but searching for a specific one. His dark eyes, usually so distant, were suddenly, painfully present, fixed on Tom with an intensity that was almost human. Tom's own breath caught. He dropped the blanket. The horse took a single, stiff step forward, his gaze never leaving Tom's, a face. He let out a sound, not a whinny, not a snort, but a low, deep grumble from the very core of his chest, a sound of confusion and urgent questioning. "Ben?" Tom whispered the name again, the word feeling strange and fragile on his tongue. "After so long." The horse blew out a hard breath and took another step, his neck outstretched. He was searching, pleading with his whole being. A cold dread, then a hot, dizzying wave of impossibility washed over Tom. He pushed himself up from the bucket, his legs unsteady. He walked on numb feet back to the house, the horse's focused, desperate gaze burning into his back. He went to the spare room, to the old trunk he hadn't opened in years. The lid groaned in protest. The smell of cedar and lost time billowed out. His hands trembled as he moved aside old wool blankets, a faded jacket. And there it was, tucked in the corner. A small, worn leather album. He carried it back to the stable like a sleepwalker. The horse was still at the door, waiting, every line of his body taut with a tension Tom had never seen. He sank back onto the bucket, the album heavy in his lap. He didn't want to open it. He wanted to slam it shut, to bury it again, to keep the past where it belonged, locked away and silent. But the horse was watching, waiting. Tom took a shuddering breath and opened the cover. There they were, smiling, faces frozen under plastic. Himself, younger, his face unlined, his arms slung around Ben's shoulders. Ben, with his sun-bleached hair and a laugh you could almost hear through the faded photograph. Their first day on this land. The old truck. The crumbling fence they'd fixed together. His vision blurred. He turned the pages, each one a small, precise cut. Ben atop a smooth-backed quarter horse, the two of them leaning against a newly built fence post. And then, the last photo. Ben, beaming with pride, his hand resting on the neck of a young, gangly colt. A colt with a distinctive splash of white and dappled gray across its haunches. A few bold spots already emerging on its coat. A Mustang-Appaloosa mix. Ben had named him Painted Promise. A hopeful name for a hopeful time. The world tilted. The air left Tom's lungs in a rush. He looked from the photograph to the horse in the stall. The scar on the flank in the picture was a faint white line on the young horse. On the animal before him, it was a thick, ropey testament to a decade of survival. The eyes in the photo were young and bright. The eyes watching him now were ancient and haunted. But they were the same. 10 years. The horse had vanished into the high country the same week Ben had been killed on that rain-slicked highway. The week everything ended. They'd searched for the horse for weeks, but the mountains had swallowed him whole. They'd presumed him dead. Taken by wolves. Fallen from a cliff. Another loss to mourn. A raw, broken sound tore from Tom's throat. It was a sob, a wail, a decade of grief finally finding a crack in the dam and exploding through. He doubled, over, the album slipping from his hands to the dirt floor. He cried for Ben. He cried for the years of silence. He cried for the stupid, stubborn hope he'd clung to without ever knowing why. He cried for this animal, this living, breathing ghost who had carried a piece of his lost love through wilderness and time, and somehow, impossibly, found his way home. He was lost in the storm of it, shaking, his face wet and his hands clutching, at nothing. He didn't hear the soft unlatching of the stall door. He didn't see the horse push it open with his nose. He only felt it. A warmth. A solid, breathing presence at his side. A heavy, beautiful head lowered next to his own. He felt the soft blow of the horse's breath on his neck, warm and sweet with hay. Then, a gentle, insistent pressure as the horse rested the broad plane of his forehead against Tom's heaving shoulder. He didn't nudge. He didn't ask for anything. He simply stood there, bearing witness, anchoring Tom to the earth while his soul shattered and broke. He stood as still as the mountains he'd come from, absorbing the tremor of the man's grief, and holding the space for him until there was nothing left. Weeks later, the first real snow fell, blanketing the ranch. In a deep, forgiving quiet, Tom stood at the fence, a steaming mug in his hand. The hollow feeling was still there, but it was no longer empty. It was a space that held memories now, not just absence. In the pasture, the horse, Promise, stood, his dark coat stark against the white. The scars were still there, but they were just a part of him now, not the whole story. He was putting on weight, his coat growing thick and warm for winter. He lifted his head, snow dusting his forelock, and looked toward the house, toward Tom. Tom didn't need to call him. He never did. Promise turned and began to walk through the snow, not with the frantic energy of a wild thing, but with a calm, deliberate purpose. He came to a stop on the other side of the fence and lowered his head, waiting. Tom reached out and laid his hand on the warm, solid neck. He felt the steady pulse of life there, the strength of a creature who had seen the heart of the wilderness and chosen to return. This horse hadn't just come back for a handful of grain or a warm stall. He hadn't come back for himself at all. He had come back because a man was lost in a cold stable of his own making. And someone, somewhere, had sent the only one who could possibly find him, a living, breathing promise, painted in scars and spots, to lead him out of the dark. Sometimes the ones who come to carry us home are the ones we stopped waiting for. If this story found a place in your heart, if you felt that quiet shift in the stable, then you're one of us. Don't let the connection end here. Subscribe and tap that bell, so you're here for the next story. Because tomorrow we'll open another door and find another piece of raw, beautiful humanity waiting inside. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you felt. Your stories are a part of this too.